There comes a moment in every journey when we must look beyond the surface of what wounded us and truly understand the heart of the battle we've been fighting. Many carry scars from encounters with narcissistic behavior, and the pain is real, the confusion is real, and the exhaustion runs deep. But if we are to rise stronger, wiser, and more grounded, we must be willing to see the full truth, not just the part that hurt us. We are not here to excuse toxic behavior or justify manipulation. We are here to rise above it. And rising above begins with clarity. It begins with recognizing that a narcissist is not an evil creature born from darkness, but a deeply damaged soul hiding behind layers of fear, insecurity, and unresolved wounds. When you understand this, something powerful happens. You stop personalizing their attacks. You stop carrying their cruelty as if it were a measure of your worth. You start stepping into freedom, because when you see the humanity behind the hostility, you reclaim your authority. You stop being controlled by the chaos around you, and you start walking with purpose, with strength, and with a peace no one can take away. And that understanding, that shift, becomes the beginning of your healing and the end of their power over your life. There comes a point in your life when you realize that understanding someone does not mean you are justifying what they did. And it certainly does not mean you are weakening your own voice. Understanding is strength. It is mastery. It is the moment you step back from the chaos and finally see what has been operating beneath the surface. Narcissistic behavior can feel like a storm that never ends, a confusion that twists your sense of reality. But when you start to understand the roots of that behavior, everything within you begins to shift. You begin to see that their manipulation is not a reflection of your weakness, but a reflection of their emptiness. Their cruelty is not a judgment on your worth, but a consequence of their own inner war. This understanding is not about excusing anyone. It's about releasing yourself from the weight you've been carrying. When you look at the patterns of a narcissist, you begin to see a person driven by fear of exposure, fear of inadequacy, fear of losing control. They build a wall of superiority because they're terrified of being seen as small. They attack because they are afraid of being abandoned. They drain others because they have never learned how to fill themselves. And when you see that truth, you begin to rise above the emotional traps they set. You stop waiting for them to change. You stop hoping they will one day treat you with the love they never learned to give. You stop walking on eggshells because you finally understand the eggshells were never yours to carry. Understanding gives you clarity. Clarity gives you direction, and direction gives you power. You start making decisions not out of fear, but out of strength. You create boundaries not to punish them, but to protect yourself. You choose peace over proving a point. You choose healing over holding on. You begin to say, I see what this is, and I refuse to let it shape who I become. And suddenly, the grip they once had on your emotions begins to loosen. You reclaim your time, your energy, your hope. You stop trying to fix what you did not break. You start reclaiming the parts of you that were buried under their demands and expectations. And in that moment, you discover that understanding was never about letting them off the hook. It was about setting yourself free and stepping into a life where their shadows no longer dictate your light, and you walk forward with a strength that can't be shaken, a wisdom that can't be stolen, and a peace that grows with every step, because now you finally see the truth behind the behavior, and you choose to rise above it with a calm, steady, unshakable resolve that becomes the foundation of everything you are becoming. There is a moment in your growth when you begin to see that the people who hurt you were not born with darkness in their hands. They learned it, they absorbed it, they survived through it. Narcissists build walls so high you can't see over them, walls of pride, walls of arrogance, walls of cold detachment. And from the outside, those walls can look monstrous, they can look intentional, they can look like they were crafted to wound, to confuse, to control. But when you look closer, when you allow yourself to see beyond the mask, you begin to understand that those walls were not built from power. They were built from pain. Behind every narcissist is a wound they never faced, an emptiness they never understood, a fear they never outran. Somewhere along the way, someone taught them that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned, that vulnerability was dangerous. So they armored themselves. They created a false self to survive a world that once made them feel small, unseen, or unworthy. That armor may have protected them in the moment, but over time it hardened into a prison, trapping them in cycles of manipulation, defensiveness, and emotional hunger. And while that doesn't excuse their actions, it reveals the truth. They are operating from a place of deep internal damage. When you begin to see the wound behind the wall, you gain something precious: perspective. You stop taking their behavior as a reflection of your worth. You stop believing their cruelty has anything to do with your value. You realize their struggle is not your assignment to fix, and in that awareness, your heart becomes lighter. You stop carrying burdens that were never yours. You stop expecting apologies they are too broken to give. You stop giving chances to someone who cannot meet you where you stand because they're still fighting battles inside themselves. Understanding their wound doesn't mean you stay. It doesn't mean you accept mistreatment. It means you rise with wisdom instead of hatred. It means you walk away with clarity instead of bitterness. It means you protect your peace while acknowledging that their actions came from a place of pain, not destiny. And as you step forward, you do so with a steadiness that changes everything. Because now you see the truth. Not all monsters are monsters. Some are wounded souls hiding behind walls they don't know how to tear down. And you choose to free yourself by recognizing the wound without letting it consume your life. There comes a time in your life when you learn that compassion is not weakness and boundaries are not hostility. Real strength is the ability to see someone's struggle, recognize their pain, understand their patterns, and still choose to protect your own peace. When you deal with a narcissist, compassion without boundaries becomes a doorway for them to drain you, reshape you, and pull you into their emotional tornado. But compassion with boundaries, that is power. That is clarity. That is the moment you stop losing yourself in someone else's chaos and start standing firm in your own truth. Awareness is what allows that balance to happen. When you understand how a narcissist operates, when you see the insecurity behind their arrogance, the fear behind their control, the emptiness behind their demands, you stop reacting out of confusion. You stop questioning your worth every time they shift moods. You stop bending yourself into shapes that keep them comfortable. Instead, you begin to respond from a place of confidence. You recognize the hooks they throw. You see the manipulation forming before the words even land, and with that awareness, you create space that protects your mind, your heart, and your energy. Boundaries are the proof that you believe in your own value. You don't set boundaries to punish anyone. You set them to protect the parts of you that matter. You learn to say no without guilt. You learn to step back without apology. You learn to love yourself enough to walk away from conversations that twist your spirit or relationships that drain your soul. And the beautiful thing is this: compassion helps you understand, but boundaries help you stay free. Compassion allows you to see their humanity, but boundaries ensure you don't sacrifice your own. As you grow in awareness, you'll notice something changing inside you. Your reactions become calmer. Your decisions become clearer. Your heart stops absorbing every blow. You begin to feel grounded, steady, anchored in your own identity. You stop trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You stop offering yourself to people who only take. You stop believing that love means tolerating pain. Instead, you rise with wisdom, you move with strength, you stand with dignity, and your compassion becomes something elevated, something rooted in understanding, not surrender, something guided by truth, not fear, something that protects your power while still honoring your heart. There comes a moment when you realize that the labels fear has placed on your life were never meant to define you. When you've been tangled with a narcissist, you're often conditioned to believe you are powerless, confused, dependent, or incapable of standing on your own. Those labels cling to your mind, shaping how you see yourself, convincing you that you are smaller than you truly are. But the truth is this: those labels were never yours. They were projections, tools of control, shadows cast over your spirit to keep you from discovering just how strong you really are. Breaking free begins when you recognize that fear has been whispering lies, and you no longer have to listen. As you step into clarity, you start reclaiming ground that you didn't even realize you had lost. You begin to understand that you were never weak, you were manipulated, you were never confused, you were misled. You were never unworthy. You were simply viewed through the distorted lens of someone else's insecurity. And once that realization sinks in, everything shifts. You feel your confidence returning, your voice strengthening, your perspective expanding. You start to look at the situation not as a victim of someone else's behavior, but as a survivor rising with newfound understanding. You see the patterns for what they were, attempts to shrink your light because it intimidated someone who never learned how to shine. Reclaiming your strength isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. It's about standing tall again, remembering who you are, and refusing to live under labels that never belonged to you. You begin to see yourself through a clearer lens, one shaped by truth, not fear. You recognize that your empathy, your kindness, your loyalty were never weaknesses. They were strengths that were exploited by someone who did not know how to hold them. And with that awareness, you rise with a maturity that changes everything. You no longer react to their judgments, their silence, their manipulation. You respond with calm certainty because you finally know your own worth. Perspective becomes your power. The moment you step back and view the whole picture, you discover that the chains were never locked. They were only held in place by the belief that you couldn't walk away. But you can, and when you do, you step into a version of yourself that is wiser, stronger, more grounded than ever before. You reclaim your identity, your direction, your freedom. You break free from fear labels and rise into your true strength, not because someone handed it to you, but because you remembered it was yours all along. There comes a time in your healing when the pain has spoken loud enough, long enough, and you finally decide to listen to something deeper. When you've been hurt by a narcissist, the pain can blur your vision. It can make you see them as nothing but the damage they caused, nothing but the chaos they brought into your life. But when you begin to understand their humanity, the brokenness behind their behavior, the insecurity driving their choices, the emptiness they've been trying to outrun, you gain a clarity that becomes a turning point in your healing. Not because their actions were justified, but because you stop carrying their darkness as if it belongs to you. Pain can trap you in loops of anger, confusion, and resentment, but clarity opens the door to freedom. When you see that their behavior came from wounds they never faced, you stop expecting an apology they were never capable of giving. You stop searching for closure in someone who cannot offer it. You stop believing that you were unlovable just because they could not love you in a healthy way. That clarity gives you permission to release the weight you've been holding. It gives you the strength to say, I understand where this came from, and I choose to walk forward anyway, knowing their humanity doesn't make the pain disappear, but it transforms it. It shifts the way you interpret the past. Instead of replaying moments wondering what you should have done differently, you begin to see that their patterns existed long before you and would continue long after you. You stop blaming yourself. You stop minimizing your own heart. You stop giving power to memories that no longer deserve control over your present. And in doing so, you create space for peace to enter. Healing becomes faster because you're no longer fighting ghosts. You're no longer trying to make sense of something senseless. You're no longer wrestling with the idea that you were the cause of the storm. You see the truth clearly. You were caught in someone else's unresolved battle, and now you are choosing to walk out of it. That clarity becomes strength. That strength becomes momentum. That momentum becomes healing. And as you move forward, you carry not bitterness, but wisdom, not fear, but understanding, not scars that define you, but scars that remind you of how far you've risen. Because seeing their humanity doesn't bring you back to them. It brings you back to yourself, back to your power, back to the future waiting for you to step into it with courage and clarity in the end. Your healing is not defined by what they did to you, but by what you choose to do with the truth you now carry. You've seen the pain behind their actions, the humanity behind the mask, and the patterns that shaped their behavior. And with that understanding, you've taken back something priceless, your power. You no longer walk in confusion or fear. You walk with a steady awareness that frees you from their grip and guides you toward a stronger, wiser version of yourself. This journey was never about excusing them. It was about elevating you. Every layer of clarity, every boundary you set, every moment you chose yourself has built a foundation that can't be shaken. Now you step forward with purpose, not pain, ready to create a life defined by truth, peace, and the courage to rise far beyond what tried to break you.